Okay, Patrick Adams,
Still present.
Paul Brierly,
Present.
Brenda Berman,
Here.
Cynthia Campbell,
Here.
Maria Dadgar,
Jay Tonk is alternate for Maria Dadgar.
Ron Doba,
Present.
Doug Dunham,
Here.
Sandy Favorites,
Present.
Kathy Ferris,
Here. Go Snakes.
Representative Gail Griffin,
Present.
Spencer Camps,
Rob Anderson here for Spencer Camps.
Jamie Kelly,
Present.
John Kamik, Chris Kuzdas,
Present.
Sharon Megdal,
Present online.
Leslie Myers,
Present.
Joe Olson,
Present.
Haley Paul,
Here.
Karen Peters,
Here.
Sarah Porter,
Yes, I'm here online and I'm almost here in person.
Clark Princell,
Here.
Robin Sahid,
Here virtually.
Joe Singleton,
Here.
Abe Springer, Craig Sullivan,
Present.
Senator Priya Sundaresan,
Here virtually.
Warren Tenney,
Present.
Tom Torres,
Here.
Representative Stacy Travers,
Here online.
Chris Udall,
Yes, here, calling from the wonderful Francisco Grande Golf Resort in Pinal County.
Sandra Watson,
Ken Burns for Sandra Watson.
Peter Becker,
Here, present, online.
Chairwoman Amelia Flores,
Present.
Governor Stephen Rowe Lewis,
Present.
Chairman Robert McGill. That is everyone. Thank you.
Hello,
So
excuse me.
John Kamik, another opportunity, because I think, John, we understand you're here.
Yes, I am here. Thank you.
We were off changing your shirt into a Diamondback shirt. Is that the delay, or?
Absolutely. Yeah, go
Thank you.
next.
So I would also like to acknowledge DWR staff at the table, Bruce Hallen, advisor to the director, Carol Ward, assistant director, Emily Petrick, deputy counsel, Trent Blomberg, council coordinator, and Ben Alternator, legislative liaison. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Carol, who'll go through our presentation on assured water supply.
Okay, thank you, Director. Good afternoon, members of the council. You see before you the meeting agenda for today's meeting. We have a lot to cover, as the Director mentioned. I won't read through all of this, assuming that you have seen the agenda previously. Just please do keep in mind that we do have a lot to cover as we move through this. Next slide, please. And the next one. Okay, thank you, Jen. So as you know, there are two areas of focus for the Council in 2023, the Assured Water Supply Program and Rural Groundwater Management. Both are critical and both require solutions now. One is to review and make recommendations to the Assured Water Supply policies to address the challenges revealed by the Assured Water Supply modeling projections. And the other, to develop recommendations for a water management framework to assist rural Arizona communities to manage their groundwater resources. As the director said, the governor expects a suite of recommendations by December of this year, and the recommendations may be changes to statute, rule, or policy. Next slide. And the next, please. Thank you. As the committee has worked to review the Assured Water Supply Program and make recommendations, they have done so under a set of critical guiding principles that bear repeating. Proposals must protect the strength and integrity of the Assured Water Supply Program. Proposals should enable future growth without reliance on mined groundwater. Proposals may not reduce the 100-year requirement or increase the depth to which groundwater may be pumped. Proposals must ensure that there is water before growth, and proposals must protect consumers. So I'll begin by recapping the committee's progress over the past 5 months. In June, ADWR staff outlined several initial proposal concepts: ideas for addressing wildcat and build-to-rent development, to address commingling as a barrier to certificates, and future infrastructure challenges. Committee members also offered proposal concepts at the meeting and submitted additional concepts to staff in follow-up to the meeting. The full compilation of concepts is available on the ADWR website. At the July meeting, the subcommittee discussed ADWR's concepts to address the issues of commingling and future infrastructure. The committee opted to set aside these two independent concepts in favor of exploring the concept of an alternative or hybrid path to designation that would include addressing commingling and future infrastructure within it. A work group was initiated to begin building out that hybrid concept. A second alternative designation concept, referred to as a nested designation, was discussed as a means to address the commingling issue in certain instances. Given the narrow applicability of the proposed solution and the potential to otherwise address commingling through the hybrid designation concept, this was also set aside for the time being. There were no immediate ideas to incentivize development on ag land, and so that concept was put on hold for the time being as well. At that meeting, ADWR staff were asked to come back to the committee with information on the potential for retiring grandfathered rights at the subsequent meeting. At the August meeting, the committee built off the momentum and comments received at prior meetings, continuing to discuss the concepts to address build-to-rent development and wildcat development, as well as the potential for retiring GFRs. To briefly summarize the outcome of the grandfathered rights discussion, ADWR is authorized to purchase and retire grandfathered water rights through the management plans. But after reviewing the allotments and the usage of irrigation and non-irrigation grandfathered rights in each AMA, the committee had some reservations regarding the benefit to be gained for the cost. Because a mechanism already exists to retire these rights, and because the concerns around the benefit being worth the cost, the committee set the idea aside to focus on exploring other concepts. The September 12th meeting was devoted entirely to the discussion of the Assured Water Supply model, as the director mentioned earlier. At that meeting, ADWR staff reviewed the model requirements and the current projection, and staff answered specific questions about the model and the underlying assumptions that have been frequently asked. These include the process for updating model and the projections, future well locations, certificate demands, the ramping up of demands, artificial recharge, CAGRD replenishment, and effluent. And to understand how altering certain assumptions would affect the model projection, we shared several illustrative model runs that staff had developed. If interested in the details of that presentation, it's very informative. I encourage you to look it up online. It's on the website. as both the presentation and the meeting recording. At the September 27th meeting, ADWR presented the concept for an alternative pathway to designation of assured water supply, or what we're referring to as the ADAS. This concept was built from what was initially conceived of as the hybrid designation, then developed as a transitional designation by a work group of the committee. The ADAS concept received significant committee support for continued development and discussion. At that meeting, the committee also discussed a concept to address wildcat development. In follow-up to the September meeting, ADWR continued to have discussions with stakeholders, answering questions and continuing to solicit and receive feedback. That feedback continued to be positive. Most recently, at the October 17th committee meeting, ADWR staff presented high-level proposals for both the alternative path to designation of assured water supply and build to rent. The committee recommended bringing both of these proposals forward to the council for consideration, which brings us to today's meeting. So today, we will share these two consensus proposals advanced by the Assured Water Supply Committee for the Council's consideration, the alternative path to designation, and a proposal to address the build-to-rent issue. The committee has done its part to develop these final high-level proposals. The committee recognizes that additional work will be necessary to complete them. And the committee recommends the remaining development occur in a way that enables expanded involvement and input, as I will later explain. There is a third proposal under development by the committee that would address wildcat development, and that may be forwarded to the council next month. And that brings us to the alternative path to designation of assured water supply proposal. Copies of the proposal and a question and answer document are at your seat. Recognizing that those of you who serve on the Rural Groundwater Committee likely haven't had time to follow the Assured Water Supply Committee closely, we encouraged everyone to review the materials in advance of this meeting, but we will touch on the proposal again today. I'll ask that you hold questions until the end of the presentation for the sake of time. The alternative pathway to designation proposal addresses several challenges that this committee identified as priorities. First, the commingling issue associated with certificates and alternative water supplies. Also, unmet demand and/or exceedances of depth to water limit in the AMA model. Incorporating non-groundwater supplies into a provider's water portfolio. Growth while future infrastructure is under development. We developed the ADAS proposal to address these challenges based on the committee and stakeholder input and suggestions in collaboration with the committee work group. The concept has evolved over the past few months, as we said, from that initial hybrid concept to what was called the transitional designation concept, eventually streamlining and simplifying it into this current proposal. The ADAS proposal overcomes significant barriers that have impeded providers from becoming designated. It addresses legacy groundwater use from subdivisions that predate the assured water supply rules or uses that fall outside of the subdivision definition. Also, limited renewable supplies and historic barriers to cost recovery for the expense and effort of securing renewable supplies and applying for designation. This proposal provides a path that enables a provider to overcome these challenges, to meet the designation criteria, reduce the unmet demand in the model, and meet the objective and the principles of the committee and council. Similar to when the original assured water supply rules were promulgated, the ADAS proposal allows providers to transition from reliance on groundwater to renewable supplies under a designation, including certain exemptions and groundwater allowances. At this time, I will hand the presentation to ADWR Deputy Counsel Emily Petrick. Emily has contributed a great deal of creativity and time to this effort, and she will walk us through the proposal. Emily.
Thank you, Carol. Next slide. So this first slide provides a high-level overview of the proposal. And in later slides, we'll get into some more specifics as well as some examples that will hopefully help illustrate the concept. First, under this proposal, existing groundwater pumping is grandfathered into the designation. Physical availability is grandfathered in based on 2021 groundwater pumping and issued certificates. That amount is subject to further reduction as new alternative supplies are included in the designation. A groundwater allowance is also granted to help meet consistency with management goal requirements for groundwater included in the designation. The second part of this proposal is that new alternative water supplies that meet assured water supply requirements can be added to the designation portfolio. A portion of those new supplies, and we've been discussing 30%, will be used to substitute for existing groundwater pumping to facilitate a transition away from groundwater. The third part of the proposal is that an expedited modification will be allowed so that providers can add supplies during the term of the designation on an expedited basis as those supplies become available. Next slide. So these two graphs are a visualization of the difference of what would occur if a provider maintains the status quo without designation versus becoming designated through the alternative path to designation. You can see in the first graphic, without designation, unreplenished pumping could continue in perpetuity. New unreplenished uses, non-assured water supply uses, could continue to proliferate and exacerbate unmet demand. In the second graphic, the alternative path to designation, future unreplenished uses are constrained. Groundwater use is reduced over time as new alternative supplies become available. And groundwater use and unmet demand in the model are reduced. So now we'll get into some of the specifics of the three parts of the proposal that I previously discussed. Existing groundwater demands will be grandfathered in for purposes of demonstrating physical availability. Existing groundwater demands will include demands for issued certificates and existing groundwater pumping and non-groundwater recovered outside the area of impact based on annual reporting for 2021. 2021 was the date included here to match the pumping data year that was included in the Phoenix AMA groundwater model. This initial volume will be subject to further reduction based on new alternative water supplies included in the designation. The existing groundwater that is included in the designation must also meet consistency with management goal requirements. That groundwater could meet those requirements through enrollment as a member service area with CAGRD. The provider would also receive a lump sum groundwater allowance based on its deliveries in 2021. This groundwater allowance volume has not been decided yet and will need to be decided after further review and discussion with stakeholders, water providers, and CAGRD. New alternative supplies may be included in the designation to serve new demands and new growth. New alternative supplies refers to water supplies other than groundwater within the AMA that were not served by the provider in 2021. The initial grandfathered groundwater volume will be reduced by 30% of the new alternative supplies to facilitate an incremental transition away from groundwater. These new alternative supplies must meet assured water supply requirements for designations at the time they're included in the designation. Future infrastructure for the alternative supplies may be evaluated according to the same criteria for existing designated providers. For existing designations, ADWR would require a construction plan and schedule demonstrating that any construction will be completed in a timely manner and that all major permits, approvals, and environmental compliance necessary for the unbuilt water infrastructure will be completed. The alternative water supplies would also need to meet financial capability requirements. Under ADWR's current rules, there is some flexibility, additional flexibility for cities and towns by allowing ADWR to evaluate a broader range of financing mechanisms, and we propose extending this flexibility to private water providers by rule. And then the third part of this proposal is an expedited modification for incremental growth. The purpose of this expedited modification is to allow a water provider to more quickly add new alternative water supplies to the designation as they become available. And we think that ADWR's rules could be amended to allow expedited modifications for all designated providers. The proposal contemplates an initial term of no greater than 15 years. That term may be renewed or modified, and the grandfathered groundwater volume will be reduced by the volume of reported pumping since the most recent designation was issued. A provider may continue under this framework indefinitely. I'm now going to go through some examples with some specific numbers to illustrate how the proposal would work. So first, in this graphic, we're starting with an undesignated provider's starting scenario in terms of its groundwater use and pumping. In this example, the water provider has 2,000 acre-feet per year of unbuilt certificate demand, 8,000 acre-feet per year of groundwater that is being delivered to certificated subdivisions, and 10,000 acre-feet per year of groundwater that is being delivered to non-assured water supply or pre-1995 uses. In this example, the total 2021 groundwater volume is 20,000 acre-feet per year. If the provider applies for this alternative designation and adds new water supplies, in this example, we've looked at the provider adding 8,000 acre-feet per year of total new alternative water supplies. Those supplies could be included in the designation. Next graphic. And when they're included in the designation, 5,600 acre-feet per year, or 70% of that total, would go towards future demands. 2,400 acre-feet per year, or 30% of that total, would substitute the 2021 groundwater pumping. Next graphic, thank you. So after these alternative supplies are included, we would be looking at the total groundwater volume being reduced from 20,000 acre-feet per year to 17,600 acre-feet per year. And this volume would now be their grandfathered groundwater volume. Next slide. So this is an example of why we think this would be a benefit to the aquifer. Of course, in our example, the total 2021 groundwater pumping was 20,000 acre-feet per year. Without being designated, this pumping could continue, non-assured water supply, unreplenished pumping could continue to grow unconstrained beyond this 2021 volume. After this designation example, the total volume of groundwater has been reduced to 17,600 acre-feet per year. In addition, because it would now be under a designation, groundwater pumping would not increase. We think that there would be an initial benefit to the aquifer of 240,000 acre-feet over 100 years through reduced groundwater pumping. But the total benefit to the aquifer would likely be even greater than that. This is, of course, because part of that 17,600 acre-feet per year that was previously unreplenished will be replenished now under the designation. Also, under the expedited modification concept, new alternative supplies can be added on an expedited basis and could further reduce this 17,600 volume. Next slide. So I'm going to provide an example now of how this proposal would work under the expedited modification concept as a new supply becomes available to the provider. So in this first box, we're starting year zero, the year that the provider is designated. And this includes all of the same example supplies that we included at those volumes. Starting right away at year zero, the commingling issue is resolved through this proposal, and the provider can now grow on the new alternative water supplies that it included in the designation. In this example, this would include up to 5,600 acre-feet per year of new growth. In this example, we've assumed that in year two, another new alternative water supply becomes available to the provider. In this example, we've used Harquahala transportation water, and that volume of water meets assured water supply requirements. The provider could then apply for an expedited modification to include this new volume in the designation. In this example, we've said that the Harquahala water is 5,000 acre-feet per year. So the provider could add that volume to the designation and serve additional new growth of up to 3,500 acre-feet per year. And then the other 1,500 acre-feet per year would be used to reduce the provider's groundwater pumping. It would replace existing groundwater pumping. Of course, as with all designations, a provider, these would be the supplies included in the designation, but a provider may use any combination of supplies during the interim period or during any 1 year. Next graphic. And so under this example, the designation could continue until the end of the term unless modified, but also I would point out that under our expedited modification component of the proposal, I think we anticipate that a provider could modify its designation on an expedited basis multiple times. And I will turn it back over to Carol.
Thank you, Emily. I appreciate all the explanation. The Assured Water Supply Committee members identified development of this proposal as a priority. The proposal has evolved through the committee's work and discussion and with stakeholder input. It has received strong consensus support from the Assured Water Supply Committee and other stakeholders, and it achieves several important outcomes. By enabling designation, the proposal gives providers more control and tools for managing water resources and demands. It addresses unconstrained pumping that is not subject to the Assured Water Supply Program, eliminating the expansion of new unreplenished uses within the service area of the provider. Importantly, and in line with the committee's task, it reduces the unmet demand by reducing groundwater withdrawals over the 100-year period. The proposal facilitates incremental growth, and it transitions the provider to using less groundwater and more alternative supplies, such as transported supplies, effluent, and surface water. It provides a path forward while meeting the committee's principles. It protects the strength and integrity of the Assured Water Supply Program. It maintains consumer protection, and it requires alternative supplies before growth. The ADAS proposal meets the criteria to be considered as a council recommendation to the governor. The policy changes to enable this alternative path to designation can be accomplished administratively through updates to the Assured Water Supply rules. The proposal provides a solid framework, but evaluation and input will be needed to address outstanding questions, including finalizing the groundwater allowance and assessing CAGRD impacts. We believe that the remaining work can best be accomplished by building upon the committee and council process through an informal stakeholder process led by ADWR. This process will continue and expand the stakeholder involvement, enabling direct participation from those providers that might take this route to designation, as well as the necessary evaluation and input from CAGRD staff regarding potential GRD impacts. The informal stakeholder process will provide time and space to accomplish necessary analysis to inform the details before proceeding to formal rulemaking. ADWR staff will move quickly to meet with stakeholders and facilitate an efficient and thorough process. And with that, the Assured Water Supply Committee submits the following recommendation for the Council's consideration. The Governor's Water Policy Council recommends the continued development and evaluation of the alternative path to designation of Assured Water Supply proposal through a stakeholder process led by the Arizona Department of Water Resources. With that, I'll hand it to the director.
Thanks, Carol and Emily. As Carol mentioned before the presentation started, we were holding questions until the end. So do folks have questions for DWR? And I see Ron has raised his hand.
Thank you, Tom. First of all, I just want to say kudos to the committee for coming up with this proposal. And it's pretty obvious that there's still going to be an opportunity for continued dialogue on it as time goes by before anything goes into place, especially with the rules change process. One thing that I just need to clarify in my mind is it looks to me like the ADAS proposal is it's only going to be available in active management areas where KGRIT exists. Is that correct?
More specifically, even in AMAs where there is unmet demand.
Okay. Well, we have.
So Ron, the CHRD element of this in my mind is kind of the backstop to make sure that the pumping or the growth that is occurring under this proposal has a guaranteed kind of backstop to get replenished. If outside of CAP service area, there's a way to create a backstop, and also there's unmet demand, as Carol talked about, maybe there's a way to expand this to those AMAs as well.
And that might be where we might have some further discussion. In the Prescott AMA, for example, you know, they've been identified as being out of safe yield for some time now, but they don't have KGRIT available to them up there. So, thank you.
Right, and we recognize that there are some differences between the AMAs that would need to be considered, and clearly that would be one of them.
Rob?
Rob Anderson for Spencer Camps. I just wanted, just a comment. I'm not sure I'd entirely agree with the strong consensus point because the current proposal is not one that's acceptable to the Home Builders Association, but we are supporting the council recommendation and moving this into the stakeholder process. So we are supportive of that, but we do have significant concerns with the proposal as is. Thank you.
So Rob, we appreciate that support to keep this possibility moving forward and look forward to working with your stakeholders if we can address some of those concerns.
If I might add to that, the stakeholder process, we like to be included in it. I think obviously as a member of the council, we would be. And Carol had mentioned it expanding, and it's important to us that the providers that aren't here today that are part of this be included in that. We also think analysis holders who are probably the most adversely affected by this should also be included in the stakeholder process. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Other questions? Representative Griffin?
Thank you, Director. I also have concerns about 130%. That actually is more than 130% on page 25. If you look at the 8,000 acre feet, if the developer wants to keep all of that, they'd need to add another 3429 to it. So it comes out to more like 143%. I've got concerns about that. I do have a question as far as expedited modification. What time frame what are we looking at for expedited?
Emily mentioned that we believe this could occur through rulemaking. We clearly have to have the stakeholder process to put the rest of the meat on the bones of this proposal as we would write up the proposed rules and move them forward. And Emily, can you shed light on the timing process for the rulemaking process?
I think for the rulemaking process, we would generally be looking at the 6 to 9 month time frame. But I would also clarify that for the expedited modification, another big part of it, in addition to the timing factor, is that currently under ADWR rules, when a provider seeks to modify its designation, we need to review, we have to review all of the criteria for the designation again. And so under this expedited modification process, we would only be looking at the criteria for that supply and the provider's demand schedule. So we would be reviewing less in terms of the criteria. It would be less of a burden for the applicant and for the department.
And the other question is, who all does this apply to? Douglas AMA, Prescott, or is it just the Valley? Or the 3 counties?
So Representative Griffin, as we talked about with Ron's question, we need to look at whether there's unmet demand in the other AMAs, including Douglas, and look at a way to create that backstop, so to speak, that the GRD purpose serves in the active management areas that are the CAP service area. We don't have a Douglas AMA model, right? So we can't tell you right now what, if any, unmet demand might attach to the Douglas AMA at this point in time. And we are working feverishly to collect the data and starting to look at putting together a Douglas AMA model as we work through the process to create a management plan for that AMA.
So in the Douglas AMA, they originally had adequate water supply. Since that is now an AMA, it knocks out that classification. Is that correct? Or
Yes, they'd be subject to the Assured Water Supply Program now.
so they have to start all over again? Or they can just exchange that qualification to assured water supply?
So without thinking through all of this, my view would be if assured water supply determinations have been made on the affirmative in that area. We can look at how they were made, but we still have to assess those against all of the assured water supply criteria that attach the physical, the legal, and the continuously available. And maybe some of those will qualify and maybe some won't. We just have to look at that on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you.
Other questions? Especially questions about clarification of the proposal, the guts of the proposal itself.
This is Sharon
Someone
Mendel.
online?
Yeah, may I ask a question? I appreciate.
Who is this?
This is Sharon Mendel. I appreciate Rob Anderson's indication that maybe the consensus was not full consensus. So I just want to ask the question about this moves forward, and you engage in this expanded stakeholder process, and somehow there ends up being lots of changes proposed. Would you bring it back to the Assured Water Supply Committee, or once it's passed on, is it kind of out of the deliberations of the council and its committees?
So Sharon, we would like to be able to move this forward to its conclusion without going back to the committee or the council. But until we work through that stakeholder process and see what issues arise and whether or not we can deal with them, I'm going to hold back the ability to potentially bring it back here. If there are fundamental changes, I think it's coming back here. If it's tweaking a knob or two here or there, that may be something different. But we won't know that until we go through the process.
Sure, thank you.
Other questions? So we gave opportunity for questions. Now I'll give opportunity for comments hopefully in support or comments raising concerns. Now's the time. Joe.
Thanks, Director Brzezowski. I believe this concept will provide a long-term pathway for water providers to perform or to proceed with a more sustainable approach without punitive impacts to the water resources portfolio. Also, we've looked at a whole challenging number of issues here, and I think this will provide a greater solution set on more of a strategic basis for some of those other items beyond just the tactical point that we're talking about today. As some of my peers have said, there's certainly additional discussion and elements that need to be fleshed out, but I don't know of a better way to do that than broadening the discussion like we're talking about here with getting other voices at the table. So as such, I fully support moving forward in this pathway.
Thanks. Others? Lauren, I think you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you. We have been known for some time that there's a lot of challenges when it comes to groundwater management. We've been very proactive as a state of saying that we've got the Assured Water Supply Program, which says that growth happens after you show that you have the water. And I think this is continuing, this proposal of the alternative path to designation continues to build on that. Yes, there's a lot of questions that still need to be addressed, and particularly with the risk to the GRD, as well as what that groundwater, the amount of the groundwater allowance. But I believe it's very positive that this group, and particularly the Assured Water Supply Committee, has been working, trying to develop a path forward. And I am supportive of seeing this continue to discuss, bring on additional stakeholders so that we can make sure that it's the best going forward. But ultimately, it needs to continue to show that we are protecting our groundwater, making sure that we are developing on renewable supplies and being as proactive as we can, because there are many, many generations after us that want to be able to enjoy Arizona, and that's what we can make certain of by working on this.
Thanks, Warren. Anyone else?
Director Bashofsky, this is John Kamik.
Hi, John, can you wait a second? We'll let Joe Singleton go first, and then I'll get back to you, John.
Okay.
Thank you, Tom. I was one of the people that recommended we forward this out of the committee, and not because I thought it was perfect, because I do think there's some things on here to work on, but because I think it's at the point where we need to find the people most directly affected by this and get them tied into the process and hear what they have to say about it. So with that, I would recommend that we proceed and get that stakeholder group going.
Thanks, Joe. John, online?
Thank you, Tom. Yes, I also want to support this recommendation coming from the council and moving it forward to a larger stakeholder process led by ADWR. I think this proposal is very interesting and valid in the discussion of this council, and I'd like to see how it evolves going to the next level. So I support movement.
Thanks. I understand State Land Commissioner Robin Said wants to comment online.
Yes, thank you for that. I just wanted to voice our support for moving this forward. It will definitely be beneficial to the trust to explore this with additional stakeholders. So I just wanted to also thank the group for their hard work on this proposal, and we look forward to engaging and seeing what comes of it. Thank you.
Anyone else? Comments? Kathy Ferris?
Thanks, Tom. First of all, I want to again thank the Department of Water Resources for its leadership on this really tough issue. This is creative stuff that they're doing. And I, for one, really appreciate you taking the lead and working on putting something out there that we can consider. And as I said in the committee meeting, we've got a real basis to start to develop rules. And I don't think we in the committee can gnaw on this much longer. I think we need a rulemaking process, because that's where you get into all the nits and picks about what's working and what isn't. So I continue to support moving this forward through a stakeholder and rulemaking process, and I thank you again for your leadership.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, Tom, I don't know if I can, I can't find anywhere to raise my hand or chat. So I'm just going to pipe in here. It's Representative Travers.
Okay, go ahead, because then we'll get back to comments in the room.
Thank you. Yeah, this is this makes me very hopeful, and I look forward to hearing what the what the stakeholders have to say. I would like, however, to say that within the stakeholder process, I don't want to lose ourselves in too many chefs spoil the broth. Some of the parameters that have already been put in, even as concepts, like I wouldn't want any of the percentages to go any lower. So I would just like us to please keep in mind that we have something really good to work with here. And I'm looking forward to hearing more, and thank you for letting me speak.
All right, thank you. Clark, and then I think Senator Sundaration after Clark.
Thank you, Director. We do support also the process moving forward, understanding that there is additional work that needs to be done, specifically with those additional stakeholders, to include both the water providers that could take part in the designations, as well as the large landowners that would take part as well, and then focusing specifically on how we ensure a smooth transition through that process and still benefit the aquifer. I would note too, if we are successful with this designation moving forward, approvals of both the designation and then additional water sources coming online, the faster those are available, the faster those benefits can come to light as well. So we'd be supportive as we can in those efforts as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Sundaration.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone who contributed. I think this is a really creative proposal, and I'm looking forward to seeing it progress through the broader stakeholder process to get, all the varied input that we'll need to get from folks who are not in the room. And I do think it's promising. I think it's important to recognize that this represents a path to designation and growth in this new era of unmet demand. And so it's important to recognize that it's a way out of the current status quo, which leaves, some with the inability to get designated and have balance and control over their portfolios. And I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear that I repeat my desire for a robust percentage to address that unreplenished groundwater use, and we'll follow closely to make sure that it doesn't get significantly weakened. I would, had my druthers, I might go as high as 50%, but of course this is a compromise process, and it's more important that we work together to get that path forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Ken Burns for the Arizona Commerce Authority. We also support moving forward with this proposal. It does begin to address the commingling issue that we've been talking about, so we're happy for that, and also a pathway to introduce new water supplies as they become available, and certainly meeting the unmet water demand. So we're in the support.
Thanks, Ken. Haley.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say, sitting on the Rural Groundwater Committee, did some research and reading up and talking to lots of folks, and it seems like this proposal really encourages or has the potential to encourage, more providers to get designated, which brings a host of benefits. So supportive from my vantage point, so thank you.
Thank you. Jamie first, and then Rob.
Thank you. Jamie Kelly, Mojave County Water Authority. I'd like to commend that subcommittee on successfully completing its task. I think they have brought forward a recommendation that is worthy of further discussion. We have concerns about what this means for pressure on other supplies. We'd like to see GRD's analysis, but we're willing to play that out in the stakeholder process in the next step. So thank you.
All right, thanks. Rob, round two.
Round two. Rob Anderson for Spencer Camps. Again, we're going to support moving the recommendation forward. We do have significant concerns with the proposal. The 30%, we're concerned that that's going to land on new development. We're very concerned that there's no transition period when the Phoenix AMA model came out. It was announced as a pause, and I think that to implement this proposal is going to take longer than I think we all appreciate. Very much concerned that current analysis holders that have spent millions, in some cases billions of dollars in investment are going to get wiped out. And then lastly, the GRD issues that have already been talked about, the integration are a concern. But with all that said, we appreciate the fact that I think the department's going to work with us on these concerns in the stakeholder process. And, we are encouraging a broader stakeholder process, as I previously stated. So we, again, will support the council recommendation to move this ahead and appreciate the opportunity to participate.
Thanks. Brenda Berman.
Thanks. CWCD supports this moving on to the next step. It was a thoughtful stakeholder process. We're committed to working with the governor's office, DWR, all stakeholders, and our own board on analysis as we answer some of the questions that are kind of left open at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Others? Chris?
We're also supportive of the concept. It's clear a lot of work went into this, a lot of creativity, and it seems like it meets multiple needs, so supportive of the recommendation, and the concept seems very promising. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? So, in summarizing, we have the recommendation before us. We have heard multiple expressions of explicit support along with some concerns that are raised that need to be addressed in the stakeholder process. I will take the silence of most of the rest of the folks around the table as tacit support. And so I believe that certainly this is one of the strongest by consensus proposals that we have before us and have discussed so far. And I believe we've successfully achieved our goal of reaching consensus on this recommendation, and we'll be adopting it. So thanks to everyone. I also want to
Tom, can you hear me?
Who's this?
This is Doug Dunham with EPCOR.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't know if we had an opportunity for online folks to chime in here. On this proposal specifically, I'd like to thank the department for all the work that went into it, and then the other members of the subcommittee. There were many of us that spent many hours outside of the subcommittee trying to put different ideas together, hash out some of the details, and there was a whole lot of work that went on behind the scenes, even outside of the subcommittee. I've got a couple comments. I know the subcommittee has heard me make these before. I think it's worth hearing it for the larger committee. Number one, the 30% cut is way too high. There's just no way that a private utility is going to be able to justify those kinds of costs. I think Representative Griffin appropriately pointed that out. We need to talk through how we phase in GRD membership, moving from member lands into a member service area. Again, there is no way that a private utility is going to be able to stand in front of the commission and say, we've done a voluntary thing, and we now have to pay all of this new replenishment cost through rates and double and triple those rates and have that successfully supported by the commission. So we need some sort of phase in on that. Again, when staff mentioned the groundwater allowance calculation. From my specific perspective, we have voluntarily been using renewable supplies to relieve the pressure on groundwater. If it's strictly calculation based on 2021 pumping, we get penalized for that. That shouldn't happen. Last time the staff mentioned the transition to a normal DAWS. Some of the presentation today seems to counter what was mentioned last time, but I still need to bring it up that if there's a sudden shift to a normal DAWS and all of the grandfathering that's under this alternate designation immediately evaporates, it's a non-starter for us. We just can't justify suddenly having everything disappear. I've mentioned today also was needing to work on the financial capability review for private utilities. The rule already contemplates that recognition of the authorities granted to private utilities and in fact the mandates from the Corporation Commission that new development has to pay for itself. And so that's already in there. So the department, we need to recognize that that's one of these self-limiting conditions where if the developer can't pony up the money to make the infrastructure go in place, the development doesn't happen. And lastly, the final product here, it needs to be flexible. We need to have reasonable requirements that recognize costs, because ultimately those go to the people that will be living in those houses. And for the purists that insist on really stringent, high percentages, I remind folks that this is a voluntary program. Nobody has to go get designated. And if it's too onerous, nobody will. We'll be back to trying to piecemeal this together with certificates. And there's also pressure from the other side to, let's just make it a 50-year program. Let's double the depth to 1,000, 2,000 feet. So we need to make sure that we don't make things so onerous that there's that negative blowback. So with all that, I still think this is a very workable proposal. It's worth working out these details. And I think that appropriate place to do that is in this stakeholder process. And we'll need cooperation from all the parties. And with all that, I really support moving this into that broader stakeholder so we can hear from the other providers and other entities that are more directly impacted. And again, I thank you for your time and thank all the work the department put into it.
Thanks, Doug. So that does not change my conclusion, as you can imagine. I do want to, as well as Doug mentioned this, thank all of you. There was a lot of shuttle diplomacy going on, lots of phone calls to lots of people who I understand were very happy to talk with us and very happy to give their viewpoint, raise their concerns, and express support for this. So we're going to put this to bed and move on now to the build to rent issue, and I'm going to turn it over to Ben Alternator.
Thanks, Director, and good afternoon, Council. Build to rent is a relatively new phenomenon that has taken off in several active management areas. In the last general session of the legislature, there was a significant interest in creating parity between these communities and subdivisions with respect to water. And the Assured Water Supply Committee reviewed the challenges surrounding these types of development. I will shortly recap those as well as the goal and committee recommendation. So build-to-rent communities are commonly referred to as single-family rentals, and the market has created this unique demand for this type of community as another option for renters without the commitment of home buying who do not want to live in traditional multifamily housing. These single-family rentals fall under the exemption from subdivision law as they are leased for less than 1 year, or they are not subdivided into more than 5 lots. The challenges identified with build-to-rent communities are they don't meet the definition of a subdivision given the 2 items I previously mentioned. Again, less than 1 year lease term or not split into more than 5 lots. Therefore, these communities are not subject to the Assured Water Supply Program requirements. Yet in all other aspects, they are similar to a residential subdivision, including having common areas and other exterior water demands. Because they are not subject to the Assured Water Supply Program, continued development without an assured water supply exacerbates groundwater mining, puts homeowners at risk, and feeds negative perceptions of Arizona's ability to manage our water supplies. Based on those challenges identified, the goal of this recommendation is to ensure that BTR communities are under the protections of the Assured Water Supply Program, and there is parity between the subdivision across the street and these communities when it comes to water. The Assured Water Supply Committee recommends with consensus support the following statutory changes to bring residential lease communities under the Assured Water Supply Program, ensure there are parity with subdivisions when it comes to the assured water supplies. The committee recommendations encompass 3 statutory changes in order to find a solution to the challenges identified in our goal. The first statutory change is defining these communities. The recommendation defines residential lease community to differentiate these leased residential single-family units from other multifamily commercial rent options and addresses the number of single-family housing units, 6 or more, and specifies that the number of these units per lot or parcel is not a consideration. Current statute provides an exemption for units where the lease term is under 1 year. Under this recommendation, we would clarify that residential lease communities are essentially single-family detached homes offered for lease without regard to how long that lease term is. And for the purposes of the Assured Water Supply Program, these residential lease communities would be viewed the same way as a subdivision, where external water use and common areas, et cetera, would be included in water demand calculations. In the committee, we had some discussion regarding the definition of what types of housing qualify for residential lease community. And because the challenges we are trying to address have been primarily related to single-family homes, we think this definition captures that class of building and is consistent with the extensive discussions that were had last legislative session. That being said, we acknowledge that this definition could be further amended during the legislative process and stakeholder process if that was necessary. Again, the goal is to ensure that there is parity between BTR and single-family residential, which are the same in all aspects except the number of lots per, or units per lot, and the use of leases instead of sales. The second portion of the build-to-rent proposal would ensure all applicable fees are paid to CAGRD if there are replenishment obligations. And the third portion of the recommendation would ensure parity between residential lease communities and subdivisions by allowing a city or county to approve building permits for a residential lease community within an AMA if the units have obtained a certificate of assured water supply or a written commitment of water service from a designated municipality or private water company, either through the traditional designation process or this potential new ADAS pathway. And I would add that we understand that it takes time for statute and policy to catch up with the market. And so it would be appropriate for those investments that are already in construction or fully permitted to continue to operate under the current statutory guidelines. But going forward, these provisions would apply to any new residential lease communities once the law is enacted. The Assured Water Supply Committee submits the following recommendation for the Council's consideration. The Governor's Water Policy Council recommends the following statutory changes so that the residential lease communities are brought under the protections of the Assured Water Supply Program and are at parity with subdivisions when it comes to assured water supplies. With that, I'll turn it over to Director Bishotsky.
So as we did previously, we'll ask folks around the table and online if they have clarifying questions for Ben about the proposal itself, and then after that, we'll go back to comments. So first questions, Representative Griffin.
I didn't even put my hand up. You just looked at me.
It's all those years
But I
of
do,
working together,
yes.
you know, with telepathic.
Just want to make one comment. You know, it's the single-family residential for sale properties are the ones that are only penalized and that we're talking about. And housing is, we've got a critical housing situation right now. So, yes, last year's bill had all of this in there except for the certificate, and that to some is still a concern, but we can talk about that. But the grandfathered process, because we have people, developers that have substantial investment in land and infrastructure and everything, millions of dollars. And so we need to consider a date certain that they're covered so that they don't file bankruptcy and end up having problems.
Thank you. Others? Ron.
Thank you, Tom. The residential lease communities are certainly popping up all over, inside of active management areas and outside of active management areas as well. And I think this is a good proposal. It's going to address, you know, the issue of parity inside active management areas. I just want to raise the point again. You know, we're referring to applicable fees have to be paid to the GRD, and some of the active management areas don't have the GRD available to them. So I would like to make sure that this is going to apply in those areas as well. They'll have the benefit of this.
Thanks, Ron. Anyone else?
Mr. Brushatsky, this is Sharon Megdal. I have a question, if I could.
Go ahead, Sharon.
Yeah, this just popped into my head as I was listening to this. And that is, if a build-to-rent property is developed without, you know, let's say it's already been developed, it's grandfathered in, and then they decide to sell the homes, kind of like how apartments became condos, you know, individually owned. What happens then?
Sharon, this has been, so as I understand it, there would still, if it's going to go through a subdivision process and that land was to be subdivided, they would still need to apply for that public report, which has its own requirements.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else, either in the room or online? So again, this is the recommendation before us. We've heard some comments in support, explicit comments in support, with some questions and concerns to be worked through. I'll also take, again, the silence as tacit support by everyone else. So again, we have very strong, in my mind, consensus from the council perspective to move this recommendation forward as well. So we can go to the next slide and talk about Assured Water Supply Committee next steps. So the next committee meeting will be November 14th. We will conclude discussion of the Wildcat development proposal and consider recommendations to the council. We'll review remaining concepts, identify priorities, and plan next steps. And we'll have continued outreach by DWR to stakeholders on the ADOS proposal details. And we will reach out and try to address the other questions that came up today as well with stakeholders. So with that, we'll move on to the next portion of the council meeting, and that's rural groundwater. So Bruce Hallen will provide an update of the Rural Groundwater Committee activities, including a preview of the committee consensus statements that the Rural Groundwater Committee has developed associated with the Rural Groundwater Management Area Framework. These consensus statements will form the foundation for which a Rural Groundwater Committee proposal might be drafted. The committee consensus statements are not fully completed, as there are a few more areas that need to be addressed at the next committee meeting on November 2nd. Since this effort began, all Rural Groundwater Committee and Subcommittee meeting perspectives and comments, both verbal and written, have been noted and captured. That information will be revisited, considered, and used in drafting the details associated with the potential Rural Groundwater Management Area legislation. Alternative views associated with the committee consensus statements have been noted. You will see those in today's presentation. However, the committee consensus statements are what is to be provided to the governor as the recommended actions when we complete all of those. And we will bring those, of course, back to the council for that final recommendation. There have been other items that have been raised through the process that will not be addressed at this moment, but the Rural Groundwater Committee will continue to do its work to provide recommendations that address the goals, objectives, and purpose of the committee. At the November 29th council meeting, we will be seeking the council's approval on the Rural Groundwater Committee's proposal, which will consist of the framework consensus statements. In the interim, we would ask council members to provide any feedback or questions regarding the Rural Groundwater Committee consensus statements to Bruce Hallen or Trent Blomberg. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Bruce to run us through the rest of the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Bishotsky. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bruce Hallen. I'm the advisor to the director. If you notice, a few of us from the department are wearing some Diamondback material. The director had reached out and asked if a few of us could wear some Diamondback or Ranger clothing today, so I thought I'd point out with me.
Hey, we have to be equitable.
With me,
I have not seen a Ranger jersey in this building, however.
Not yet. But this shirt has been worn twice. It was worn the last time 22 years ago, and I'm happy to say that it fits, kind of. So with that, what I would like to do is thank all of the Rural Groundwater Committee members. We've had 7 meetings. A lot of people have traveled to these meetings. You've all made it a priority in your busy schedules to attend, participate, provide written comments, and meet separately on various occasions to discuss committee efforts. So thank you for that. First slide, please. And I'm sure many of you on the committee can recite this terminology, but we bring this up at each meeting, so this will be good for the Assured Water Supply members. But we talk about the current state and why we're here, and then also touch upon goals and objectives. The current state of rural groundwater, as you all know, outside the AMAs and INAs, there's just limited regulatory framework for managing groundwater. There are no requirements for metering and reporting outside of the AMAs and INAs. Many communities and areas are facing aquifer depletion with limited access to renewable supplies and really no tools to manage those groundwater declines. And there have been increasing calls here at the department for a framework that will assist these rural communities. I'd also like to point out that while there is some data within these rural groundwater basins, the department has access to in monitoring aquifer conditions, there's a lack of comprehensive data points for better understanding of the geohydrologic and hydrologic conditions in these basins and within these rural aquifers. So there is also a need to develop a measuring and monitoring program to better understand conditions and as a means to measure progress as aquifer management programs are developed. Secondly, I think this map also displays that there's a real diversity of the aquifers and areas of the state, and it dictates the need for a program that is not a one-size-fits-all, but a more customizable approach that reflects local basin conditions. You know, and for example, if you look on here, the groundwater basins in southeast Arizona that are made up of alluvial aquifers with very limited renewable resources are much, much different than the geologically fractured aquifers along central Arizona's Mogollon Rim. Next slide, please. The goals and objectives, we have the same date by December 2023 to develop policy, legislative, or other actionable recommendations. I won't read this, but I think what I'd like to stress and point out that these recommendations are there to assist rural communities, are there to manage local groundwater resources, protect water users, sustainably manage aquifers, and sustainably manage rural economies, and provide an alternative option to creating an AMA or an INA, but be sure that they're flexible and based on the unique physiographic and socioeconomic characteristics of the basin. Next slide. The process that we've gone through. ADWR developed a framework to use as a starting point, and which was shared with the committee on August 9th. But the August 9th framework was drafted following input and discussion from the committee, and we ultimately began with a starting point proposal at the committee's first meeting on June 29th. That starting point include elements from other groundwater management programs that have been discussed with stakeholders across rural Arizona and across the state for over the past 10 years. We have requested input from committee members throughout the process and have captured, as Tom mentioned, Director Bushotsky, all written, verbal, and remarks from each meeting. We will be revisiting those remarks as we compile more details in drafting or potentially drafting legislation or other actions that we might take following submitting the committee recommendations to the council for approval. While consensus has been reached, we drafted, discussed with the committee, revised, and ultimately came to an agreement on committee consensus statements that address the components of establishing a rural groundwater management program. There was also separate engagement with committee members in parallel with all of these committee meetings. Next slide, please. So here's a brief recap, and I'm not going to go into much detail here because we talked about this at our last meeting. But as I mentioned previously at the June 29th committee meeting, we provided an overview of other groundwater management programs that have been proposed, including comparisons to AMA and INA regulatory programs. And from that, we put together a starting point proposal. And there was also information provided on a few select groundwater basins, providing some context to the committee members on the groundwater situation and challenges. For the July 11th subcommittee meeting, we discussed what is needed for a rural groundwater management program, what makes sense, what doesn't, what elements of previous proposals seem most viable, what doesn't, and what might be missing. Next slide, please. At the August 9th subcommittee meeting, we took the input from the past two meetings and drafted this working framework that we've been working from which the committee could respond to, could provide comment. We provided comments, there was revisions, we even added to it, and narrowing down to two primary areas of focus for the committee: the need for additional measuring and reporting, and a framework and developing a framework for managing rural groundwater. The remaining committee meetings, August 17th, 14th, 4th, and 19th meetings, have really focused on detailed discussions in the input regarding the components of the framework. And these are the results I want to share with you today regarding that framework. Next slide. The committee was here to draft and recommend a new framework for rural groundwater management. The initial proposal was built on and shared concepts from the local groundwater stewardship area legislation. The new framework for managing rural groundwater we labeled as the creation of rural groundwater management areas that encompass a groundwater basin that is experiencing aquifer stress. A rural groundwater management area program complements many of the past proposals over the past 10 years that have been proposed, vetted, and discussed with a wide variety of stakeholders. It includes a broad focus, supporting individual basin needs, significant local and water user input for those that are directly impacted, and a focus on managing aquifer conditions, and oversight, direction, and approval by the Department of Water Resources. The committee essentially redesigned many of these past proposals and added other elements to the Rural Groundwater Management Area Program. Next slide, please. Included on this slide are the key areas where the committee focused its efforts. These were derived based on committee input and have been thoroughly vetted and discussed with committee members. The three key areas listed in italics are areas that have not yet been discussed in more detail by the committee, and we plan to be addressing those three areas at the next committee meeting on November 2nd. But from these components came the committee consensus statements. We have a preview of those consensus statements that we'd like to share with you all and that have been agreed upon, with the intent to present and seek approval on all the committee consensus statements at the next council meeting. And I would also ask from those of you that, as we go through these, I would also ask that those of you, if you have any comments or questions, as Director Poshadsky mentioned on these committee consensus statements, that you reach out to myself or Trent. Next slide, please. As you go to create a rural groundwater management area, we realized that it's really in sequence. So we thought we would share with you the sequence of events that would need to take place in order to create one of these rural groundwater management areas. Number one is initiation and creation. The process, as has been agreed upon by the committee, can be initiated by County Board of Supervisors, petitioned by registered voters, or the DWR director, with DWR conducting a hearing process, and the director has final designation authority. The next step would be an acknowledgement of existing uses. This is something that wasn't considered initially and had been brought up by committee members, this need to protect existing uses. So we formulated this acknowledgement. Acknowledgement, we also talked about using terms such as registry. We also use terms such as talking about these as certificates. But essentially, it's an acknowledgement of existing uses. And upon establishment, groundwater uses across all sectors would be documented and recognized and would be subject to conservation or efficiency measures while providing that flexibility to all those users. The next step would be creating a council membership that's made up of individuals and water users that are located within this rural groundwater management area. The council membership entrusts program development to locally appointed groundwater user planning bodies in partnership with the department. Area goals would be the next step, setting area goals that would really be customizable for the unique basin's characteristics and challenges, but those goals would be developed in partnership with the council and together with the director. And then next, an area plan would be developed, and that area plan would provide the council and local users the opportunity to develop innovative solutions that meet local needs and support the area goals to ensure sustainable water management and sustainable rural economies are maintained. So as you can see from this information here, none of this has really been predetermined, but it has been an open process for sharing ideas, reviewing past efforts and perspectives in developing a groundwater management structure for rural Arizona as an alternative to establishing an AMA or an IMA. So what I'd like to do next is go through these committee consensus statements. I touched upon this a bit. This has a little bit more detail, but essentially a consensus statement that has been agreed upon by the committee members on initiation and creation for the Department of Water Resources. Number one, the director has the option to initiate the process. Number two, criteria should not be more onerous than creating an AMA. At least should be created when there has been a significant decrease in aquifer levels over time and access to groundwater supplies are being threatened. For local stakeholders, the process can be initiated by the County Board of Supervisors resolution or petition by percentage of area registered voters. Within both of these areas, there is a lot of discussion on particular details. One of those details that we haven't come to any real agreement on was petition by percentage. Well, what percentage and how much of a percentage? So there's details that still need to be worked out associated with each of these consensus statements. But we view those details being worked out when it comes to us potentially moving forward with legislation and bringing stakeholders in and ironing out what some of those details might look like. Public hearing and approval, DWR to conduct a hearing process that is similar to establishing an AMA or an INA, and the director would have full final designation authority. Next, we realized and this was something that was brought up by committee members, that there would need to be an interim pause when it came to groundwater development. So the committee consensus statement is there's a need for a pause on groundwater use expansion that begins when rural groundwater management area is designated and continues until a management plan is approved by ADWR. So the thought is no new non-exempt wells within area boundaries, but there would be some exceptions for supplies necessary for protection of human health and safety. And also there would be some exceptions needed, for instance, for well replacement and well replacement issues. But one of the human health and safety issues that we talked about was Safe Drinking Water Act compliance. There may be a need for a well that might have to be re-drilled associated with Safe Drinking Water Act requirement compliance measures. Next slide, please. Acknowledgement of existing uses. There is a need to document current, and I want to point this out to our committee members. We had a lot of discussion on these committee consensus statements, and we had some changes that were made. So we've included these changes that we haven't discussed at our meeting yet, but you'll see those in red. So we plan to discuss these items at the November 2nd meeting. But there is a need to document current and historical groundwater uses and users. If a rural groundwater management area is established, it applies to all sectors and water use types served by non-exempt wells. You'd need sufficient information to make the acknowledgement determinations. These acknowledgements would be subject to conservation or efficiency measures or other actions identified in the management plan needed to achieve the management area goal. The process to establish should be more streamlined than the AMA application process, and it needs to provide flexibility for water users and the local economy while achieving the management goal. Next slide. Required council duties. Committee consensus statement on the required council duties needs to make a complete record of its proceedings that are open to the public for public review. Cooperate with federally recognized Indian tribes, cities, towns, counties, water providers, and local, state, and federal agencies or organizations to engage in coordinated regional planning, coordinate with the department in creating area goals in the plan that address the needs of the basin, and request technical assistance from the department. Recommend and send to the director the area goal and plans, then ADWR issues final approval of goals and portions of the plan to be implemented by DWR, and striking anything that might be illegal or unconstitutional provisions and recommending against impractical provisions. Potential council duties. The committee consensus statement was gathering additional information or data that may be needed for them to carry out their roles and responsibilities, establishing a steering committee, advisory committee, or other structure to solicit and receive participation, comment, and advice from residents and other interested parties regarding the development and operation of the area plan. And the council may have other duties, responsibilities, and capabilities to be finalized in legislation. Next committee consensus statement was on the rural groundwater management area goal. So the area goal would be the overarching goal of the rural groundwater management area. Each rural groundwater management area must have at least one goal, with all goals tied to the needs and conditions of the local area. The goals must address the groundwater conditions and criteria identified when designated the rural groundwater management area. The council should cooperate with federally recognized Indian tribes, cities, towns, counties, water providers, and other local, state, and federal agencies or organizations when drafting goals. Council must draft and recommend goals in consultation with the department, and the director issues final approval of those goals. Next, committee consensus on the rural groundwater management area plan. The committee consensus statement was the plan shall include one or more management goals for the area approved by the director, a description of the appropriate physical and socioeconomic conditions in the area and how the goals relate to those conditions, summary and consideration of other relevant local management plans currently in place in the area, for example, city general plans or county comprehensive plans, methods to monitor and report on progress toward the goal, measuring and annual reporting for non-exempt wells, rules governing well location, and mandatory water conservation programs. For the rural groundwater management area plan, committee consensus statement on where the plan may include any other actions deemed appropriate by the council for achieving the goals with approval by and coordination with the department or other entities as necessary. Recommended, not mandated, supplemental water conservation and management actions for implementation by cities, towns, counties, water providers, and other public agencies within the area. At each of these meetings, committee member comments and feedback, all council member feedback and comments associated with all the components of the framework have been captured, as the director mentioned, from each meeting and posted in the notes. And as the director mentioned, this feedback will be utilized in the further development of the framework details. There were alternative viewpoints of council members, and those have also been noted for each component and issue. The significant alternative viewpoints shared with the committee include, from Senator Kerr and the Arizona Farm Bureau, existing water users should not be subject to any required conservation measures that would reduce the historically acknowledged volumes of water use, and designation of a rural groundwater management area and selection of an area advisory council members should be done only through election. So Rural Groundwater Committee next steps. Our next meeting will be held on November 2nd at 1 p.m. So I'd ask committee members to review the final component. We will be reviewing the final components of the Rural Groundwater Management Area Framework. The focus will be on council membership, sunset, and review. So please provide comments, suggestive revisions, and additions for discussion by the committee. And then we're also going to present an updated measuring and reporting concept for review and approval by the Rural Groundwater Committee. So with that, would we like to take questions, Director, or shall we?
We have a few minutes at least to take comments or questions on any of the statements, and we can go back to any of the ones through the slides that people would like to comment on. Representative Griffin.
Thank you, Director. I have heard from a lot of people throughout the state. Some of them have written letters. For the record, I'd like to go ahead and pass them out and apply submit for public record their comments. I need to keep one. From a number of supervisors throughout the state. And everybody, if you would take one and read it, not only the supervisors, but I've gotten an enormous amount of calls referencing this. We plan on having a statewide meetings like we did a few years ago with Rusty Bowers, and we're going to go around the state and get more comments as to how people feel. I do also, because there is no vote of the people, I do also have, and I don't know whether you have this updated copy of the basin management plan that was proposed or is proposed by Senator Kerr. I'd like to also pass that out and have one for the record so that you have an idea of what some of the other individuals are talking about. No public vote seems to be a really hot button issue. The pause by all users, you did take that into consideration, so it wasn't just a pause from agriculture, it's from all entities. We plan on hearing from the people and including a larger stakeholder group so we can get more comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Representative Griffin. And I know that materials submitted to the committee to date, the groundwater committee to date, have all been posted. We will look at posting these two documents as well so that we continue, as we've been very meticulous towards posting everything we get so that everyone can see everything that's coming in a very transparent way. Other questions or comments? So I'm not seeing anyone online, so I don't miss you folks.
I have a question.
Yes, is it Senator Sundaration?
Yes, thank you. On the consensus statement on measuring and reporting, I think that's really a valuable piece of the pie because as the problem was outlined, there's just a lack of even knowing what is being done. I don't know how far back in the slides, but I did note that I think the consensus statement or proposal was to measure and report all non-exempt wells. And I wonder in a situation where we really need to fully understand, the pumping that's occurring in these aquifers, whether there's already data that suggests that exempt wells don't need to also be measured and reported because 35 gallons per minute over the course of a year could certainly add up to quite a lot.
So Senator Sundaration will take that into consideration. One thing we can certainly do in the department through our wells databases, look at how many exempt wells are out there. And we know that folks with exempt wells are not pumping them 24/7, 365 at 35 gallons per minute. We'll take a look at that and hopefully get some idea of what the bang for the buck would be to expand any reporting requirements to the exempt wells, the less than 35 gallons per minute as well. Anyone else?
Director Bishotsky, this is Sharon Megdal.
Yes, Sharon.
I have a question, maybe to Representative Griffin. On these listening sessions, I've been an advocate for more robust listening sessions. Will you be letting the council know when and where you might be holding them?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
All right, anyone else online?
Director, this is Chris Udall.
Chris, what was your score today?
I didn't play. I've got a boot on my foot from a Achilles tendon tear, so the doc said no. But
So you set a new low for the course, 0.
Yes, but we have a good crowd. The weather's perfect, so that's all going great. I just want to say thanks for everybody that's sitting around the table trying to hash out topics that are difficult to discuss. And I appreciate the extra meeting time dropped in to discuss things where there's no consensus and just be able to broaden that discussion. Look forward to the next the meeting on November 2nd, and do hope to be able to hear from a lot more stakeholders in this process. But just want to say thanks for the effort, and I have been listening in from the very beginning. Just want you to know I haven't been in the other room eating lunch or glad handing or anything like that. So it's been a helpful discussion.
Thanks, Chris. Anyone else? Before we move on to a more discussion of upcoming meetings, I want to say a couple things. So no doubt the conversations in this committee have been a bit tougher than in the Assured Water Supply Committee, but they also have been open and comprehensive. Some of the concerns raised in this committee have been very specific and perhaps, in the view of some, very fundamental in their nature. Again, a little bit different than Assured Water Supply Committee. However, I'll point out a new rural groundwater management tool can create an outcome for these folks in these groundwater basins that will allow a more flexible and locally tailored outcome compared to the current tools, an active management area or an INA. And I think that last piece there is hugely important. That is what we're trying to accomplish here. We're not trying to pick on any one sector or bring rural Arizona in under anyone's thumb. It really is about a tool that can be more flexible and tailored to the local conditions, because we know from the committee meetings and presentations by our hydrology folks that we're seeing serious declines in groundwater levels in a lot of the basins around the state. So there is an issue, and I hope that we can come together and find this more flexible tool moving forward. So we'll move on now to discussion of upcoming meetings. So we have dates for the committee meetings and council meetings. Assured Water Supply Committee, next meeting Tuesday, November 14th from 10 to noon. And the Rural Groundwater Committee, 2 meetings, November 2nd, 1 to 3, and November 16th, 10 to 12. We have a hold on a Water Policy Council meeting November 29th at 1 to 3. We do need, again, to get recommendations out of the Groundwater Committee, and there's some more potential out of the Assured Water Supply Committee, again, by our end of December deadline. I do want to ask folks if it would be a hardship to move the Policy Council meeting to the morning, 10 to noon instead of 1 to 3, where we're having more and more programs that DWR is getting involved in, and at least I have a conflict that afternoon with a really important issue. So would it be problematic for folks on the council to be able to attend in the morning from 10 to noon instead of in the afternoon from 1 to 3?
Mr. Brushatsky, this is Sharon Megdell. Is there a chance to move it a day, like later? I'm supposed to be at a binational meeting with the IBWC commissioners that I was willing to step out of in the afternoon. I'll be in El Paso, presuming the federal government doesn't close. But the morning, I think, would be essential for me to be at. So I'd have to miss it if you move it to the morning. But I'm just one person. I understand that.
Sharon, we'll take a look. It's probably not a great idea to move the actual date. I have no idea what so many of our staff schedules are for that day and whether this room is even available. So I think we'll try to keep it on this date, but try to move it to the morning. It probably will accommodate the most folks on the council, because I haven't seen any one raise their hand or raise concerns, Sharon, other than you about
Yeah, that's okay.
moving it to the morning. So we'll get out an email regarding moving that date for that particular meeting. So I just want to say, in conclusion, again, thank you, everyone, for all the hard work. It was a little scary in June when the governor came to this room and told all of us she wanted recommendations by December, but not surprisingly to me, because we've all worked together and come up with solutions in the past. We are on a really good path to having some very impactful recommendations for the governor in December. Thanks to so much of the hard work of the folks around this table, and in some cases, your staff. Certainly, the staff of DWR, appreciate that, and working with Patrick out of the governor's office to keep this moving in the right direction and make sure we're reaching out outside of the committee and council meetings to so many stakeholders through what I like to call the shuttle diplomacy process. So with that, we are actually 7 minutes ahead of schedule, amazingly, because we covered an awful lot of the material. And again, all of this will be posted. You can look at the language in a much more detailed and close way by going online to our website. And again, thank you, everyone. And we will be adjourned, and hopefully you all make it home by 5 o'clock to watch the game. Thanks, everyone.